Hey everyone, Steve Harris here with MuseThemes.com. Today we're having a look at our new frame scrubber widget. So what this widget allows you to do is, rather than use a video in the background of your website to show some motion, this allows you to use an image sequence. So basically a sequence of still images, and as you scroll down the page here, you can see that the images kind of play together and it looks almost like a smooth video or smooth motion. However, the cool thing is when I keep scrolling down, I could stop, and you notice the background will stop, and then I could actually go backwards or scroll up the page and the video will kind of play backwards, or the sequence plays backwards here too. So it's a little bit more powerful than a video, and there are some benefits to this, like for example, a little bit better mobile compatibility. You may have noticed that video backgrounds don't always play on mobile devices. Also, file size can be a concern when using videos, and with this method you can better optimize the images for size. So really great widget. I am a big fan of this one. So there are some intricacies to setting this up in Photoshop and generating a sequence. So let's go ahead and run through it all right now, and I'll show you how to make it work. So let's jump into Muse first of all, and I'll show you what the widget looks like. So I've got it in my library here. So it's called Frame Scrubber. I'll drag it out on the page. The first thing you'll notice when you drag this out is that the widget has kind of this long vertical frame. And the reason for that is because this frame will adjust and kind of show you how far you'll need to scroll to see your entire sequence. So basically, if I have a sequence in here with 25 images, I'll need to scroll down to this point to be able to see the bottom of it. So let's take a look at some of the options on the panel real quick. We have things like the image file name or prefix. So we're going to use the add files for upload method here to add our files to our Muse site. And this just prefix is the kind of name that you've set the images to. After the initial name, you need to have 3 digits, and these digits need to correspond to your sequence. So it'll be 001, 002, all the way up to, you could do 1,000 or 999 rather in this image. Then we can adjust the number of frames. We can change the working layout, so you could work on desktop, or you could use this on a phone or tablet layout. Then we can change some settings like the speed of the scroll and the offset, which actually I'll explain a little bit later here, but we have some overlay options for overlaying a pattern, or we can overlay an image. So it's a great widget with lots of setup. So before we dive too deep into setting this up in Muse, the first thing we're going to do is need to generate an image sequence. And that can take a little bit of time because you'll need to rename some files. And so the best app that I've found to generate the image sequence is Photoshop. However, there's probably a ton of ways you can do this using things like Premiere or other video tools. So I'm just in Photoshop now, and let's click File, and I like to go Import Video Frames to Layers. And when I do that, it brings up, of course, a Finder window, and we'll be able to select our video. Okay, so I just have a video here in a folder. It's called sample.mp4, and it's just this little video clip we've used for our video backgrounds widget. So let's go ahead and open that one. And when we do that, Photoshop pops up and it says range to import, beginning to end. So we could kind of crop how much of this video we want to use down here. Let's just import the entire one. Now it says limit to every however many frames we have here. So now the thing with this is, this video clip is about, let's see, I think it's about 15 seconds or something like that. So it's not that long. But if you're exporting every single frame, you're going to end up with a huge sequence, hundreds of images. And then your file size of all of those images could get a little bit big. So what we'll do in this case is let's limit our frame, or limit to every 5 frames. And let's click OK. So you'll see what Photoshop does here is it imports all of these various layers for your clip. And you can see that even only exporting 5 frames, I still have up to 78 layers in my Photoshop file here. So now that we have all of these layers here in our Photoshop document, you can see that as I turn on and off higher level layers, you can see the image sequence there kind of moving. And you would have noticed if you exported a frame or a layer for every single frame that the movement between each of these would be very minimal. And now on this version, you can see that the movement is quite substantial. We probably could have put it up to even every 10 frames a different layer, but let's just go ahead and use this for now and we'll see how it works. So what we need to do now is we need to go ahead and export these layers. There's a couple ways you can do it. You could click File and Scripts, and there's a script called Export Layers to Files. This just allows you to generate PNGs or JPEGs or whatever you want for all your layers. Another way you can do it is by using something called Generator. So I like to use generator. So first what I'm going to do is save this file. I'm just going to save it in that folder and let's call it frames.psd. Okay. Now we can turn on, if we go to file and generate, then you have image assets. So we'll turn that on. And what we do when we use generator is we name a layer and Photoshop will generate an image asset for it. So let's go to name this layer image 001.jpg, just like that. So when we've named that layer that way, let's bounce back to the folder now, and you can see that there's now this subfolder called Frames Assets. And if you look in there, there's an image in there called frame001.jpg. So that's what generator does. So what you can do then is, I don't know how you'd want to do this fast, but you can go ahead and copy the image names and you could put in, you know, number 2, number 3. So you basically need to go ahead and rename your layers all the way up. I have found too that if you start with a higher level layer, so let's go with 50, something like that, you can paste your name in, and when you hit tab, it'll jump to the next layer. So when I hit tab there, it jumped for some reason down to 29. Oh, it's because that one has the last visible layer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on all the visibility on all the layers that I want to use, and then we can go ahead and rename them quickly. Okay, I've got all the layers turned on, so let's go ahead and name them. Okay, perfect. I've gone ahead and renamed all the layers, so you can see that we have about 50 layers here, all image 050 and down.jpg, and we've just ended on image 000.jpg as our last layer. So we want to start at 000 all the way up to however many you want. So once we've done that and we have generator on, you can see that they're now all in this folder. And if I actually scroll through the folder, you can see that our sequence is kind of coming to life here. Okay, so once we've generated all those assets, and let's have a look at the file size here of all of them. They're all about between 6 and 25 kilobytes big. So this is actually a really small sequence of images compared to using a video instead here. So now that we've got that ready to go, let's jump back into Muse and let's set this up. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go File, Add Files for Upload, and we can go ahead and use that sequence that we've just created. So let's just go ahead and select this whole thing and add all of those for upload. Okay. So once we've done that, you can see that in our Assets panel, we have all these images all ready for upload. And the next thing we'll do in our widget is we just need to enter in that name. So we have image file name prefix. And right now it says image right there in the widget. So that's actually the correct name that I used. If you used image underscore, you'd use an underscore like that. You could call these anything. Frames. Just make sure that this prefix matches the beginning name of your images. So I've got image. Okay, how many frames do I have? I've got 50 frames. Okay, so we set that. And you may notice when I set that to 50, that this frame here, or this kind of container in Muse, got much longer, of course, because it's a longer sequence. And the working layout is the desktop. So then I'll go through the scroll and the overlay options after. One thing I want to make note of here is that the bottom of my sequence is about here, but in the browser, I can't scroll all the way to this point. To be able to scroll all the way there, I need to add a little bit more page below that. Basically, you want the top of the user's browser to be at this point. So once I've done that, I should be able to preview this in the browser, and let's see if our sequence looks good. There you can see we have a static image of our sequence here, and as we scroll down the page, our sequence is coming to life. So everything's working really, really well in this case. Now you may notice that your sequence will stop at a certain point. I notice on mine that right about there it ends. That's because it's hit the end of the sequence, the 50 image sequence, but I do have a little excess page below that, and that's why I can just scroll a little bit past it without seeing anything. So let's go ahead and adjust some of these scroll speed settings, and I'll show you how these work. So we have scroll speed and offset. So a lower scroll speed value will create a faster animation. So if I set this down to 5, and I set the offset to something higher like 20, let me show you what happens. We should get a faster playback on the actual sequence. So now when I scroll down, it plays really quick. However, because of that offset, you may notice that if I scroll and kind of let go, we get a couple frames after. It's almost like easing, and that's what the offset does. So if you want it to stop dead right where you stop your mouse, you need to set the offset to something lower. So in this case, let's change the speed. I think the speed looks a little bit better at something like 15 or even go up to 20. And let's say set the offset down to 5. Okay. So now when we preview that in the browser, We have a much slower sequence playing as I scroll down, but the nice thing is where I stop the mouse, the sequence stops as well. It doesn't carry on a couple past that point. So those are settings you definitely will want to adjust, and you can kind of control the length of this playback sequence. And now we can look at some of the pattern overlay options. I'm just going to shrink this page a little bit. Okay, there you go. So let's have a look at what we can do with color and pattern overlay. So we have an overlay color. Let's just set this to black. And we have an overlay opacity. So this, of course, would represent a percentage. So if we set this to, say, 0.6, that would be about 60%. And if I preview this in the browser, then you can see it's much darker. So there's basically a solid black box at 60% transparency overlaid over this background. Now we can overlay a pattern image as well. So let's go ahead and change the overlay back to white, and I'm just going to set this back to 0 so it doesn't do anything. Okay, now let's set a pattern overlay, and this is going to tile. So I have an image called pattern.png in my folder here, and it's just a small tile of a pattern. You can use a site like Subtle Patterns to download a pattern for this. And let's go add file. We will add that pattern.png in there. Okay, and then now we have the overlay opacity of the pattern. So let's do something kind of dramatic at first. So let's go 0.7, and we'll preview that in the browser. There, so now you can see we have this grid pattern overlaid over the background, and as we scroll down, the sequence is definitely playing behind, but it's a lot more subtle because of that pattern, and actually looks really great like this. So that just about covers our new frame scrubber tool. One thing to remember is always start your sequence with 000 and finish at whatever number you want, and the prefix will just be whatever you put before those numbers. The widget will automatically look for those items. And if you find a great way to generate these image sequences, I thought Photoshop was pretty quick. It only took me a few minutes to do this one in the demo. However, if there are better ways, please do share it with us because we'd love to see. Thanks again for watching, and best of luck with this widget. Cheers.